is Steve Mays. Steve, thank you for being here and welcome.
Glad to be here.
All right, so today we're going to talk about despair. Well, at least how to get rid of despair or what it does to us. You have it as a central part of your Power of Three leadership program. Why did you put despair in?
Well, in the process of looking at the three levels of the leadership paradigm that's in the book, I looked at all the challenges a leader has to face and be able to deal with in order to be successful. And as I was doing that, one thing that came up over and over again was the fact that people would be in situations where there'd be real difficulties in their lives, either as the leader or the follower. And I thought that was really important. Now, some people just talk about it in kind of general terms like morale or esprit de corps or things like that. But I think it's something deeper. And so I started looking at that, and that's when I came up with the concept. I used to do a thing where I would ask people when I do let's say, Tina Turner had a song back in the old days in the movie about Mad Max, which was by Mel Gibson, if you're old enough to remember that, the original Mad Max. And the Tina Turner song was called What's Love Got to Do with It? And the verse of the song says, what's love got to do with it? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? And I thought about that, and I realized that love has everything to do with leadership. So we needed something in the leadership paradigm to address that. But it wasn't the issue about what love was. It was the issue about what the absence of love was. And when I looked at that, I defined love as a powerful emotion that compels you to act to the benefit of others. And so the opposite of love is not hate, which is a powerful emotion that compels you to act towards the detriment of others. It's a powerful emotion that prevents you from acting towards others. And I refer to it in the book as the shutdown button on your soul. So when you're in despair, which is the opposite of love, you're not able to lead and you're not able to follow. So I decided that the best way to handle that was to write in the middle of the picture, drive despair out. Because when you're in despair, you can't lead. So you have to be able to look at yourself and examine yourself and find the things that are dragging you down and try to get rid of them, or at least deal with them so they're not dragging you down and making you ineffective. That can be anything. Your dog dies. That's a simple one. You have something go wrong with your car and it's a huge bill to pay, and now you don't know where you're going to get all the money. That's a problem. But when you have a situation...
What about if your computer has a technical difficulty so you can't get your interview started?
That's the kind of things that cause despair to be driven into your life. There are things that are happening that you can't do anything about, and they're painful to you, and they're making you unable to fulfill your mission and your desire. So they cause despair. And those can range anywhere from just slight to devastating. I know a gentleman who was a colonel in the Marine Corps who had 10 children. And one of his children was born with a birth defect, and they tried their darndest to save the child, but they couldn't. And this particular colonel recognized that not only was he in despair, but that his support system, his wife, was in despair, and he still had a group of people he had to lead. So he had to set up something where other people will assume responsibilities he would normally have, but he couldn't do those when he was in despair, and he had a leadership obligation to his wife to be there for her. So that's the kind of thing that a leader has to deal with. You have to understand when you're in despair, and you have to understand when other people are in despair so that you can take action to try to help them out.
Okay. Well, in my world, we talk about hope, and with hope, anything is possible. So despair is certainly void of hope, which makes things impossible. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. And if you want to go back to a biblical reference, one of the St. Paul's famous comments about the things that are the great of there's love, hope, and charity.
Yes.
And of three, love is the most important. And because when you love, you have hope. If you can't love, then there's no reason for hope to be there. So hope is a consequence of love, in my estimation, anyway. So it's important that you do that. And when I say love, I don't mean sex. I mean love. There's a difference, and people get the two confused. But love is when you absolutely feel compelled to try to do something for somebody else,
Okay.
and that's important.
Steve, would you say that love is when you want to do something for someone else, and sex is when you want someone else to do something for you?
Well, it could be partially for you and partially for them too, but the point of it is it's more of a biological necessity and an instinct than it is an emotional. I don't think a horse or an alligator or a fish, when they procreate, have a feeling of emotion about it. I think it's just something that is a instinct, and I think we associate love with the procreation cycle as human beings because we find it convenient to do so. I don't think love is limited to that. I think love is about helping other people to do things that they couldn't do for themselves and to do things for people. And I think that's where all of those things come from.
Well,
so
you mentioned
when you don't have love, you have despair. And the job of a leader is to get rid of despair. So the question comes up, how do you tell if people are in despair? How do you tell if you're in despair? Well, you have to have a self-examination and the humility part in order to do that for yourself. But all you have to really do to find out if people are in despair is just look around.
Right.
Look at their face. Look at their eyes. Look at how they talk. Look at how they say. Look at what they do. And the example I use in the book, and the sample I use as an indication of when people are in despair, that people often do, is a thing I call malicious compliance.
Malicious compliance?
Right. Malicious compliance. An organization or people who are in despair, they often go into a protective mode of malicious compliance. In other words, they think what's going on is crazy and nuts and stupid, and they can't fix it. So they just say, okay, just tell me what to do. I'll do it and leave me alone.
Right.
So they go into malicious compliance. And the example I give is a production company has goals to produce something, and they've been producing something for a long time. And in order to make up and keep up with the schedule that they've been producing, they've started to slack off a little bit on the maintenance and the safety in their plant. So the senior managers for the company don't mind because the production's good and the maintenance costs are down because you're not doing any. So they think this is great, so this is normal, and they just keep doing more of it. Well, that just begins to breed on itself, and eventually the people who are working in the plant get to the point where they just can't stand it anymore. Things are unsafe. Things are not working properly, and they work extra to try to keep them working. So they just fall into making mistakes because they're in despair. So the management comes out and says, okay, people are making too many mistakes. So we're going to institute a zero tolerance policy for failures to follow procedures. We're going to require verbatim compliance with all our procedures. This is why I hate the zero tolerance concept. There's a line from one of the Star Wars movies, only Siths believe in absolutes. So they put in a verbatim compliance requirement. So the plant is getting ready to start up one day, and the shift comes in to start the plant up. And they say, okay, we got to go do verbatim compliance. They're all in despair. So they go in and they open up the procedure manual, and they have to start 4 pumps for the plant to run. A, B, C, and D. And the procedure says, in order to put pump A online, you need to vent the pump. And it gives them a bunch of steps to vent the pump to make sure air is not inside the pump. When they get to the bottom of the thing, it says repeat steps 1 through 13. But it doesn't say repeat them on steps 1 through 13 for pumps B, C, and D. So they look at themselves and they say, oh, verbatim compliance. We can't do this for B, C, and like we've always done. This procedure tells me I have to do it on A. So they spend the entire shift venting the A pump. Well, after about 6 or 7 or 8 hours, the bosses come down and say, how come we're not started up yet? And they say, we're following the procedure. We're venting the A pump. And they say, well, why aren't you venting the B, C, and D pump? He says, well, the procedure doesn't say to do that. He says, well, obviously that's what it means. And they go, yeah, but you told me verbatim compliance, and I am verbatim complying. They said, well, we'll just change that, and we'll just move on. Nope. I have to comply with the procedures, and I can't comply with a new procedure until it's approved and written and approved by management, and training has been conducted, because that's what the procedure says. And so they go, oh, darn. They realize they've created a mess. So they change the procedure. They get all the people in management to buy into the change of procedure. They come back down and they say, well, now will you do this? And they said, no, you haven't done the training for everybody yet. And the guy says, well, for crying out loud, everybody knows how to do this already. So, but we haven't had the training. The procedure says we have to have training. And finally, they says, okay, what is this really all about? And the guy says, look, we haven't been maintaining the equipment. We have safety conditions here that are dangerous for our people to operate in, and you guys are ignoring us. And so we're not going to do anything except follow your procedures until these things are fixed. So then the plant guy goes, all right, you're right. So they go back, they take a plant shutdown for a week, and they do the maintenance that's required. They fix all the safety problems that existed, and then the plant starts back up with the new procedure that's been fixed, and they start the A, B, and C, and D pumps, and everything works fine, and production back to normal. Now here's the problem. Malicious compliance was what was being done because the staff was in despair. There was nothing else they could do. But it eventually got solved. But here's the big problem. All the losses that occurred during the problems when the plants were breaking and the people weren't following procedures, and then they didn't get the plant started up because of the verbatim requirement, those all were permanently lost production. You can't get those back. They're done. They're gone. You may be back online again, but those other ones were gone. And furthermore, there is always going to be a corporate memory of how things could be if you're not careful, because these guys will drive you into despair.
Right.
So that's why it's so important that despair not be part of your organization. And that can be either because people have personal problems, or it can be because you have procedures or admin or tech support problems, for example. Those are the things that make people despair, and those are the things that leaders have to be keen to be looking for, both in themselves and others.
Management could have solved the problem a whole lot easier and quicker if they had just been willing to listen to the staff
and look around
and
just
see
look around, see what was happening,
what really is needed. Okay, so
right.
So one way to get rid of despair is to get the boss to listen to you.
True, and they were focused on what made them look good,
right,
to their bosses, which was production and low maintenance costs. And their bosses thought they were great people because they had great production and low maintenance costs. And nobody put the two together that low maintenance costs meant production couldn't stay at that level.
Okay.
So
well, Steve,
that goes back to the other part. That goes back to the other part of the paradigm, which is about honesty, seeing the situation the way that it is, right, not the way you want it to be, and not the way you think it should be, but the way that it is.
The way it is.
And
right.
And that's the kind of thing where if you fail in the foundation, to be honest, you risk driving despair into your organization. And it's important that whenever you see despair, you constantly look for it, and you have to consciously try to avoid it. You have to constantly try to fix it whenever you find it.
Okay. Well, Steve, let's say that I have a job, and I'm actually working in that plant that you're talking about, and that wasn't the only problem. It seems like that something was going wrong every month, and so the job just takes its toll on me and drives me into despair. And because I'm in despair, then I'm passing that on to my family instead of when my child says, well, come on, Dad, let's go out and back and play catch. I growl at him and tell him, no, I'm tired. I've worked hard all day. Get your brother and go play catch. Or or my wife wants something and I growl at her. So it spreads through everybody in my family. Okay.
Correct.
So now, do I just quit that job and go find a new job?
Well, that's a problem you have to do on an individual level. I mean, from a leader's perspective, one of the keys that will tell you that you're having despair in your organization is people are leaving.
Right.
And when you try to find out why they're leaving, if you're smart enough and humble enough to try to find out why they're leaving, they will tell you, or they may not tell you, but you have to look. If you don't even bother looking, then you're almost guaranteed to be surprised by what happens. So this is why leaders need to be engaged. They need to be engaged. They need to reflect on leadership every single day, not on the details of the day so much as every single day.
That makes a consultant important, doesn't it? When you can bring somebody in from the outside, they can sit down with your staff, and the staff will talk honestly with them, where maybe they won't talk honestly with you as the leader of the organization.
If that's the climate and the environment you've created, that may be one of the ways, or may be one of the only ways that you can get that level of information. But as a manager and a leader, I want to distinguish, there's a difference between leaders and managers, by the way. But as a leader, you want to know what's going on with them so that you can do one of the other things that's in the leadership paradigm, assist, which is the next level up in the paradigm. You want to help them do what their job is to be able to do it better. So the honesty part compels you, and the assist part compels you to look for those things that would help them out. And if you're not doing that, then you're going to be surprised at why people are leaving.
Right.
And if people are leaving in droves because they can get a better job someplace else and not be in despair, you need to be looking not at them, but at yourself, and then what you can do to try to make it better.
Okay. Let's go back to your colonel for a moment. He was a colonel, wasn't it, that had the 10 children?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I had 2 children, and you know, there was a certain amount of despair trying to raise 2 kids. I can't imagine what a house of 10 children might be like. But what are some of the things that the individual can do? Because your life at work is not going to work for you. You're not going to be perfect on the job, leading your people there, if you don't have your home life and your personal life working and functioning properly. So
correct. There are cases where what goes on outside of the job affect what's going on in the job, and there are cases where what's going on in the job affect what's happening outside the job. And if you're the leader, you can't just draw a boundary and say, I only care about what happens when they walk in the door on Monday morning and when they walk out of the door on Friday afternoon. Whatever else happens is their responsibility. It's not my problem. Well, guess what? It is your problem. It is your issue. It's not a matter of being snoopy and getting into everybody's business outside of the job and telling them how to live their lives. That's not your call. But what it is understanding what the potential factors are that may be affecting their ability to work, and how those work things may be not good, and then recognize that those will be taken out not only on your work, but on people outside your work. That's just a matter of...
Can we go back to love for just a moment? Last time we talked, you told me about a sailor, I think it was, who was going to kill himself.
But he's going to kill his wife.
Oh, I'm sorry, kill his wife. Well, same. But anyway, you got out of bed, you went and addressed the situation, you helped him. That was because
Correct.
You cared about the people in your command.
Correct.
Okay, so where do you put on the priority scale? Where do you put love?
Well, that's a good question. And one of the things that struck me, started to think about this way, There's an old saying that you get more what you measure and less of what you don't. And so I took the challenge when I thought about that, and I went back and I pulled up the United States Navy's fitness report forms for officers from ensign all the way up to captain, 06, a four striper, or a bird colonel if you're in the Air Force or Army type of person. And I looked at what the fitness reports were saying about people. And, you know, it is your fitness report that is the basis for whether you get promoted and what jobs you get selected for in the future. The Navy's OPNAV 1610 form has 7 rows on it. And you can be graded below average, average, or above average on each of those 7 rows. So there's 21 particular, there's 7 rows. You know how many rows were leadership?
No.
1.
1?
1 out of 7. So if you want to get a cumulative score that's going to enable you to move up in the Navy, you can afford to be a little bad on 1, but you can't afford to be bad on 2 or 3 or 4.
Right.
The problem is that if you're going to move up in the Navy, leadership needs to be more important than just 1 of 7. It really does. So even then, the leadership one is so vague that it doesn't really measure how honest you are, how courageous you are, how much you care and drive despair out, how much you how you handle expectations that are missed, how you handle ethical conduct. It's just kind of a general thing, leadership. Are you a good leader? Well, that's really a subjective thing, and it's really not very good for measurement. But they do a very good job of saying, looking at, do you get your qualifications on time? Do you stand watch properly? Are you capable of executing a mission? Those kinds of things are all in there. They measure those very directly. And they have inspections and performance measures and tests to see how you do on all those things. But in leadership, it's just kind of leadership, 1 out of 7.
Okay.
Now, the problem I have is that the things that lead to catastrophic leadership failures are not the things that are measured on performance appraisals, performance evaluation. And so every time we have a catastrophic leadership failure, and everybody goes, oh my gosh, how did that happen? I'm going, well, what did you expect? You don't measure the things that are important, and you gloss over the things that are important, and then when things go to hell in a handbasket, you say, how did that happen? Well, it happened because Murphy's Law, the first law of probability is that anything that can go wrong will go wrong if you give it enough chances.
Right. And to follow that up, I can't remember whose law it was, but they said in that law, they said Murphy was an optimist.
Murphy was an optimist, yes. And that's true. That's true in leadership. I mean, it's not a hard thing to figure out. The examples I give in the book, I give the example of Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, and David Petraeus as 3 people who had catastrophic failures in leadership. Nixon resigned, the only guy to resign the presidency. Clinton lost the House and the Senate to the Republicans and lost his law license and was fined and lost a lawsuit over his shenanigans. And Petraeus had to resign as the head of the CIA because he was keeping a secret, which was he was having an affair with his biographer. Now, all of those things are due to an inability to be honest and be courageous about what you needed to do, not a problem of talent. So again, there's another example of how the importance placed on talent outweighed the other things, and those other things weren't measured. And so why are we surprised when we get leaders who do things like that? Why are we surprised when we find congressmen who are taking pictures of their private parts and sending them to their girlfriends when they're married to somebody? You know, why are we surprised when that happens? Because we don't elect congressmen on the basis of that. We elect congressmen on the basis of do they bring money into our district, or do they support policies that I like or not? So when we have these catastrophic failures, it's because we don't measure the things that are important for preventing catastrophic failures. And driving despair out is one of them, because that reduces hope and it causes people to not function well. And we don't measure it, and so it keeps happening.
Okay, so what do we have to do, Steve? I mean, this is not an isolated issue. We've got a lot of people that are in leadership that should not be in leadership because they aren't qualified leaders. What is your suggestion?
My solution that I think has to be dealt with is we need to start teaching people about what leadership is at a much younger age. I'm talking about high school and college people. We need to explain to them what leadership is. Now, if you talk to most people about leadership, you just get generalities. You get things about style and personality, and you get general things like, oh, they're a trustworthy person, or the old Boy Scout thing, honest, trustworthy, loyal, the 12 traits from the Boy Scout oath. We don't talk to them about the things that leaders do and what the things you have to be able to do in order to act like a leader. So we confuse personal traits with what leaders do, with actions. So we need to put together a leadership model like I tried to put together in my paradigm that says, this is what leaders do. Then you have to then say, okay, how do we measure whether or not this is getting done?
Right.
Only then will we do it. Right now, our leadership concept is we find somebody who's very talented at something, and when they get really, really good at it, we say, okay, now you're the leader.
Right. And they know
And
how
if
to
you put somebody who's
they may know how to do their job, but they don't necessarily know how to work with people.
Well, and leadership is different from being technically good at your talent, your job.
Right.
So we set these people up, and then we say, oh, you're going to be a supervisor now, or you're going to be a manager now, and then we're going to send you to a school to teach you some little things about leadership here and there. And they throw you into a fire of budgets and schedules and expectations and meetings that higher ups have, and you're going like, geez, how do I do it? And oftentimes you lose perspective because you're worried about pleasing the people that you're working for, and you forget about the people you came from, or conversely, you're so focused on the people of where you came from, you can't bring yourself to adapt to the issues that the people senior to you will have to deal with, so you're incapable of dealing with it. That goes back to the honesty part. You have to recognize that there are things that are valid and just that are being asked of you, and there are things that are valid and just that you should ask of others. And you need to find a way to make all those things fit together. And if you don't have a picture on how to do that, it's difficult to do. For example, if you're going to go out and play baseball, you know what the rules are. You know there are positions and there are rules, and people do things, and you know how the game is played. That's all set out for you. Then the rest of it is, are you any good at it? Can you run? Can you hit? Can you throw? Can you catch? Okay? But just because you can run, hit, throw, and catch doesn't mean you can be the manager of the baseball team.
Right. Okay.
But at least in that field, you know that there's an organization and there's a structure. If you go out and ask them looking for a leadership book, Google it if you want to. Just Google leadership and say, look for something that's along the lines of what do leaders do? What constitutes good leadership? And you get lots and lots of books and lots of references, and they all come up with generalities. And they're all about, well, are you a trustworthy person? Are you likable? Do you care about people? Do you, say what you mean and mean what you say, kind of things, which all may be good, but they're incomplete as far as pulling it all together into a picture and saying, these are the actions that leaders actually do. Because sometimes leaders aren't always the nicest people around. I worked for years for a person who was a real jerk. His name was Admiral Hyman Rickover. He was a brilliant man, an incredible leader, an effective leader, and a jerk. I know people who are the most honest, well-meaning, loving, caring people on the planet that I wouldn't trust to lead out of a wet paper bag, because that's not in their nature. That's not what they're good at. That's not what they do. And we need to focus on what it is that leadership really means and really teach it. Now, I'm happy that the Naval Academy, where I graduated from, actually now has formal courses, academic required courses in leadership. We didn't have any when I was there. You were just expected to show up, be told how to follow, and then tell other people how to follow. And somewhere along that process, by seeing other people doing things by osmosis, you're going to figure out what it took to be a good leader. You couldn't look it up and say, what do I need to do? Give me my instruction manual for how to be a good leader. It's not there. It doesn't exist. And so that's part of the reason I tried to write the book, is to help people frame some of the stuff they were hearing and find places where they could put it in piles that made sense.
All right. Well, Steve, speaking of the book, we're just almost out of time. However, I saved enough time for you to tell us about your book and where we can get it.
The book is called The Power of Three: Lessons in Leadership. It's available on Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com. And I also have a significant portion of what's in the book on my website, www.powerof3leadership.com. Now, Power of Three Leadership is all one word. And you can use the number 3, or you can spell out 3, THREE. Either way will get you to the website.
Okay.
When you see that paradigm picture, and I'll challenge you to do this as well, because I know you've seen it. You've seen that picture, and we've talked about it a little bit. That's the picture. I have it on my computer. I don't know if I can click to it and you can see it or not.
That's all right. That's all right. We've got it.
Anyway, once you see that picture, once you've seen that picture, and we've talked about it for between the two of us for about maybe an hour, I guarantee you that every time you see a leadership issue that comes before you, that picture is going to flash in your mind, because it's kind of like the idea, don't think of an elephant, and you just thought of an elephant.
Exactly.
So if you have that picture in front of you and you see it and you just get the least bit of familiarity with it, it'll become like the elephant that you can't forget.
Great.
And every time you see a problem, you'll say, that's a mixed expectation problem. That's a despair problem. That's a failure to assist. That's a failure to depend. That's a failure of honesty. Or you see something really working well, you'll say, that person does these things really good. And so it will stay with you forever.
Great. Steve, thank you very much for being with us today. You've been listening to Real Hope with W.L. Laney and my guest, Steve Mays.
Thank you, sir.